$300 billion in Russia's assets abroad. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on the world community, including the United States, not to remain silent and increase pressure on Kremlin after another massive air attacks by Russian Federation, which hit more than 30 Ukrainian cities and villages on Sunday night. Russia launched almost 300 strike drones, mostly Shahed drones, as well as almost 70 missiles of various types, including ballistic missiles. Zelensky said that the world has no right to remain silent because such action only encourages Putin to continue the war. Quote, "The world can go on a weekend, but the war continues regardless of weekends and weekdays. This cannot be ignored. The silence of America, the silence of others in the world only encourages Putin." Zelensky says that sanctions will definitely help because determination matters now, and the determination of the United States, the determination of European countries, all those in the world who want peace. The world knows all the weaknesses of Russian economy, Zelensky said. Quote, "It is possible to stop the war, but only thanks to the necessary force of pressure on Russia." Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed Saturday the return of over 300 Ukrainian soldiers from captivity in the second day of a major prisoner swap with Russians. The majority of the soldiers released were taken captive in the Donetsk region in 2022. Ukraine and Russia also each released a total of 390 combatants and civilians of Friday last week.
We continued the exchange today. Another 307 of our warriors have been returned home, privates and sergeants. Most of them are from the armed forces of Ukraine. There are also members of the National Guard and the State Border Guard Service. Of all these people, 273 were taken captive in the Donetsk region, many as far back as 2022. Others were captured in the territories of Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv and Luhansk regions. In total, over these 2 days of exchanges, 697 Ukrainians have returned home. Throughout the day, emergency efforts continued in Kyiv, following the Russian strike. Unfortunately, people were injured, residential buildings and a shopping mall were damaged. Russia fills each day with horror and murder. It's simply dragging out the war. Ukraine is ready for any form of diplomacy that delivers real results. We are ready for all steps that can guarantee true security. It is Russia that is not ready for anything. Next week must be a time for action aimed at increasing pressure on Russia. In other words, aimed at securing peace.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump will attend the NATO summit in Hague. However, NATO leaders are keen to avoid any clash between both leaders. The summit of NATO leaders scheduled for June in The Hague will be held in a shortened format in order not to create too many reasons for conflicts between Trump and other members of NATO. The summit was shortened from 3 to 2 days. A formal dinner will take place on the first day and 2 working sessions will take place on the second day, one on defense spending and other on defense industry. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsna, however, said that Zelensky's refusal to visit would be a serious strategic mistake by the West, as it would be the only topic the media would cover after meeting. However, if the Ukrainian leader arrives, a separate meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council will not probably be organized for him. Also, the final communique of the NATO summit to be held in June in The Hague will be significantly shortened. The document may not contain any mention of either Russia or Ukraine. According to NATO representatives, the goal is for the final document to consist of only 3 paragraphs. According to one European official spoke on the condition of anonymity with Radio Free Europe, Donald Trump also is ruling out the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO anytime soon, and for NATO it may be better not to mention Ukraine at all in the declaration, just not to trigger Donald Trump's response to this. Also, according to Bloomberg, the European Union is considering discounting more than 20 Russian banks from the international payment system SWIFT. The European Commission is consulting with EU member states on plans to disconnect more than 20 Russian banks from the international payment system SWIFT. as well as lowering the price ceiling for Russian oil and introducing a ban on the Nord Stream gas pipeline as a part of the 18th package of sanctions. The EU is considering an additional ban on financial transactions for about 24 banks and new trade restriction worth about 2.5 billion euros to reduce Russia's income and limit its access to technologies necessary to wage war against Ukraine. As a part of the sanctions package under discussion, the European Commission also plans to propose lowering the G7 set price ceiling for Russian oil to around $45. This limit is currently $60 and prohibits service providers from the G7 countries from transporting and servicing the sale of oil if the price exceeds these limits. According to the news agency, a key point in the new package is the EU intention to impose sanctions on the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The sanctions will further confirm Europe's position on the reluctance to resume supplies of Russia's gas. In addition, EU wants to expand sanctions against the shadow fleet of Russian tankers and considering further sanctions against banks that contribute to Russia's war, as well as the Russia's direct investment fund, according to Bloomberg. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Hanoi to meet with Vietnamese President Nguyen Quoc as he started his visit to the region of Vietnam. French President Emmanuel Macron met with the Vietnamese President Nguyen Quoc. The stop in Hanoi is the first on his Southeast Asia tour. He will also visit Indonesia and Singapore to strengthen French relations between both countries. Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu and Phan Van Giang signed an agreement for a supply of military equipment. Also, Vietnam's low-cost airline Vietjet made a deal with Airbus to purchase 20 A330 aircraft. Macron's trip is in progress as US President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 50% tariff on European Union goods.
The international order, this, in a time of imbalance, but also the returns of power speeches and great intimidation, necessitates that we act together to preserve an order based on law, an essential condition for any prosperity. Indeed, while Russia continues its aggression against Ukraine, we have agreed on the importance of achieving a lasting and robust peace, with an objective that begins with the implementation of a ceasefire. But more broadly, and we also mentioned this when speaking about the South China Sea, we share the same view to defend international maritime law.
That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.